what about alternate content in general? Is that something that, I mean, from an exhibition perspective, are you thinking of programming things in a different way, Wayne, and also from a distribution perspective, taking on different projects that aren't necessarily a straight film? Will we see Roadshow doing a series of live concerts? Will we see something like that?
Yes, at the end of the day, I do, and I think it's all a question of what happens with Windows in terms of where you go with video on demand and everything else. And the question becomes: are we with 3D and with digital cinema? Are we going to have sporting events and concerts? And I mean, I think that's more an exhibition question than it is from my point of view. But do I see a day where people are looking at things other than feature films in cinemas? I do. It's happening now in America and elsewhere.
Yeah, but the question I have is, like, how big is that? How big of a business is that on an annualized basis for exhibition? You know, I come from Canada, and Cineplex in Canada were the big innovators. First out of the box, they had wrestling, live wrestling for years, but they are probably the most successful presentation of the opera, etc. And you know, the CEO of Cineplex has said, you know, if I can get it to 3% of my business, or maybe 4% of my business on an annualized basis, I'm going to be thrilled. I personally think that, you know, one of the things that we as an exhibition industry need to do is focus on putting the show in show business. And we had a little dinner in Vegas, and Brad Bird came and spoke with some of our key exhibitors, and he was talking about how going to the movies should be magical, and how he remembers it to be magical, and how he makes his movies to be shown in cinemas. And he talked about going to his favorite theater in LA, the El Capitan, because when you come to the theater on the outside, they pipe the music from the movie outside, and the anticipation begins. When you go inside the theater, they have these beautiful drapes, and so it's like a present, and to be revealed inside will be the special presentation. And of course, they have their organ that plays there, and they do all these special things that builds anticipation, so that as long as the filmmaker delivers a great product, and the sound is right and the picture's right, the experience just can't be replicated anywhere else. I think that really needs to be something that we as exhibitors need to focus on.
Well, I'd say that we experienced that in the very first presentation that we had. The side walls were used in the theatre, and we became immersed in something, and it was alternate content, drawing us towards the focus of what needed to be done. But we were like, oh, wow, yeah, we're going to do a lot in this room, can't we? You know, is that, I did ask before again, Joel, about from a distribution perspective, from a studio perspective even, are we going to be seeing more content created purposefully that way? So it's not just a film, whether it's 3D or 2D, it doesn't matter. But are we going to have people feeling things in the room rather than scratching a card and sniffing it? Because I know the Spy Kids is doing that. But separate to that, like, are we thinking about what exhibition means and therefore how to distribute to it so that we get more people en masse going out sitting together in a dark room?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to say there. First of all, the theatrical experience is unique. I mean, unless you know, property prices drop radically in this country and people can start turning their houses into hectare-type warehouses and they can replicate a major theatrical experience, it's not something they're ever going to be able to do in the home. And a lot of filmmakers go to enormous lengths to get their films to look a certain way and to achieve them in a certain way. And there are marketing opportunities, like we've seen in the Spy Kids film with the scratch and sniff thing, which has been done for a long time. We'll see how it works in a few weeks' time. And you know, we've also seen the experimentations which are going on with moving chairs and that sort of thing. Ultimately, I think that at the end of the day, audiences come because they like the experience and because there's a movie that they want to see. That's why we see the market spike so substantially when there's a major release, when there's a Harry Potter, when there's a Transformers or something like that. We see the box office spike. It's not just that the entire population made a collective decision that weekend they want to go to the movies from a generic perspective. They want to go and see a specific film. So ultimately, I think it comes down to the content. And when we talk about alternative content, I still think it's somewhat embryonic. I think if you went back about 10 years ago and people said, do you think people come and see opera in the cinema, most exhibitors will say there's no chance. I mean, you look at the viable business that has become. So I think that we will see more choices, and there's no shortage of choices for cinema. There's almost competition to get it on screen, and I think ultimately it will, from a distribution point of view, it will be about making the decision as to whether the content has an audience, and then deciding to pursue it.
Would you, when you say that, would you look at difference like a limited release?
Well, I mean,
how you perceive it, a limited release, because you wouldn't have 5 operas all in one area, would you? Because, you know, really there's only one opera house in Sydney.
Well, we haven't done any opera. I mean, it'd be worth talking to somebody who does do opera, but I mean, an example that I can think of is that we found a project about George Harrison. It's a documentary about George Harrison that Martin Scorsese directed. It's not typical roadshow fare, but we thought the idea of George Harrison's story being told by Martin Scorsese might have potential in the theatrical format. We weren't sure, and we saw it, and it's perfect alternative content, so we'll have a go. So, I mean, it's a case-by-case scenario.
With everything else. Go on.
Well, the only idea I was going to share that I thought was interesting, I was just recently in the UK, and they're quite successful with the opera as well, but what they were successful in doing is, you know, the program really started in the US with Live at the Mat, which is on Saturday afternoon, which in Europe would mean Saturday evening, and they don't want to lose those shows. So instead, they've been able to convince the local opera company to present on Monday and Tuesday evening. They still fill the houses, but on evenings where they're typically rather quiet, they don't upset their partners at the studios because if they lose a show or two on Monday or Tuesday night, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, but how many people are playing it in that area? It's just one cinema, or is it?
No, they're playing it across their entire circuit.
And I think that comes down to, you know, the expertise of the exhibitors understanding their market, understanding their customer base, because that's really, as they're going out and booking a feature, it's no different when you're looking at alternative content. It's the exhibitors who understand their market. And so if it's just making that alternative content available, and if that's digital that allows that, or if that's, you know, live content delivery, or, you know, satellite or whatever, it still comes down to the exhibitors understanding what's available to them, because they know their customers, and they'll want to book that content if they believe that they have a customer base that would want to see that.